An interview with Pauline Kael by Hal Espen. From The New Yorker, March 21st, 1994. Espen. Why do you refer to objectivity as saphead objectivity? Kael. I hate to spell it out, but here goes. Our responses to a movie grow out of our experience, knowledge, temperament, maybe even our biochemistry. I always thought that the reason Stanley Kaufman and I so rarely agreed on things was clear if you looked at his measured walk versus my incautious quick steps. I'm just naturally attuned to jump cutting. I tried to put my background and predilections right out on top, so that the reader could know what my responses came from, and I tried to suggest perspectives on moviegoers' emotions, because we're all susceptible, in varying degrees, to dramatic pressure. Ideally, criticism is a matter of your intelligence and all your intuition coming into play. Yes, a critic should be disinterested, not have a stake in the outcome of a movie at the box office. But you can't make an objective judgment in any of the arts, and this should be perfectly clear about movies, because they touch people's responses on so many levels. What makes you read a movie critic regularly? Flashes of insight, especially about what the movie means and how it affects us. But I'll gladly take them about a performance, the sets, whatever. I'll even settle for a good phrase. There are eminent critics, steady, intelligent, who have never had a perception that could spark a fresh thought in anybody. They're so higher degree educated, they're drained. You read them and think, yeah, I'll read anyone who makes me laugh and is on target. Which did you like more, to pan or to praise? Panning can be fun. You roll up your sleeves and head into the Augean stable. But it's also show-offy and cheap. It isn't sustaining. If you really like something, writing becomes humble and stirring. You give yourself to the work you're describing. You want to do it justice, and you want to share the pleasure it has given you. Writing about it intensifies your own pleasure. Did you ever think you'd been cruel? Yes, and I knew it at the time I was writing. It wasn't being cruel to be kind either. There's so much intellectual sloppiness out there that sometimes you have to be ruthless to keep a sane basis for writing about pop culture. And sometimes a cruel remark, even if it's an overstatement, is the best way to get a point across. Do you think there are many independent-minded critics at work now? Some, there are always some, but the vast majority are swept up in the campaigns for movies and in the atmosphere at the time. For example, Woody Allen's Manhattan Murder Mystery is, I think, the most enjoyable movie he's made in years. But it was passed over, maybe because it's so light in tone, or maybe because it wasn't fashionable at that moment to like a Woody Allen movie. The Picture is a dud as a mystery, but it's a lovely marital comedy. Maybe co-writing once again with Marshall Brickman helped restore Allen to the timing he used to have. And when he and Diane Keaton get a rhythm going, it's as if they'd never stopped being comedy teammates. Some people say that you tell young critics what to think. Yes, I've read that. I run a conspiratorial network of young critics. The evidence seems to be that young writers often parrot me. But who wants to be imitated? A number of critics take phrases and attitudes from me, and those takings stick out. They're not integral to the writer's temperament or approach. I hate it when I read a piece in a magazine and hear echoes of things that I wrote years ago, on totally different subjects. If I told critics what to think, do you suppose they'd be acclaiming Unforgiven and The Piano and Naked? How do you deal with the possibility that your reaction against something like The Piano may grow out of your having seen so much? You try your best to clue in the reader. Sometimes, the less there is going on under the surface of a daydream movie like The Piano, the more moviegoers project into it. They make it theirs. So there mightn't be much purpose in my comparing the image of the piano on the beach to the imagery in Polanski's short film 2 Men and a Wardrobe, but I definitely try to contrast the piano with Utu, the 1983 New Zealand film by Geoff Murphy, in which a band of Maori guerrillas vandalize the farmhouse of a British couple and pound on the piano before smashing it out the window. The piano represented the wife's last connection with the culture she'd come out of, and it represented the culture the Maoris wanted to desecrate. Its destruction has a lot more resonance than anything in the piano. But then in Utu, the woman played Beethoven. Holly Hunter plays New Age trills. What about the director, Jane Campion, who's viewed as a great new talent? She does have a gift for imagery, but she's totally arbitrary in an art school way. Things don't hang together in her movies. The symbolism never really registers fully because you can't tell what she's symbolizing, though you know damned well it's symbolic. The piano could be a silly erotic fantasy and still be fun if it didn't have so much unexamined feminine smugness. That's what sets it apart from, say, a romantic gothic that would lull an audience with sweet dreams. This movie congratulates its heroine for any damn thing she does. You used to answer a huge volume of mail. Do you still answer letters? Well, the volume is way down, but I can't answer them all anyway. I want to, but with Parkinson's I can't get my hand to oblige. What do people write about? Mostly they want to know what I think of a particular movie, Streisand's The Prince of Tides, for example, or The Crying Game. And what do you think of them? If Streisand were more tough-minded, The Prince of Tides could be enjoyable camp. But her sincerity, the naked emotionalism she pours into it, makes it somewhat embarrassing. I think that the emotionalism is what affects people and what they find a little bewildering. As for The Crying Game, watching it I kept thinking, if the hero's lover had been a clinging vine woman who built altars to her men, she would have been considered a sick chick, and the hero advised to get away fast. With a transvestite in the role, many people found the relationship weirdly romantic and kicky. People just really went for that kind of secret, although it was an open secret by the time the movie came out. Well, it was open the first time some of us looked at the guy, the wrists and his voice, but I think it wasn't just the publicity gimmick. The picture had a romantic pull for many people. It had something they'd been missing in movies, the magnetism they'd have shrugged off in a boy-girl picture. Neil Jordan has got to extend his territory. In Mona Lisa, he had a man falling in love with a lesbian. In The Miracle, he had a man falling in love with his mother. In The Crying Game, he has a man falling in love with a transvestite. Still, Jordan has a wonderful gift for atmosphere. A number of silent film directors gave audiences a sense of magical possibility, of romantic enchantment. Neil Jordan is one of the few new directors who have that lyricism. People felt very protective of Rain Man and were convinced that it did something serious. You got a lot of complaints, didn't you? I got very angry mail from people who felt that I didn't appreciate the real-life seriousness of autism because I didn't appreciate the movie. The press, in general, publicizes what the director says he's doing, and afterwards the reviewers tend to review his intentions rather than what's on the screen. If some of us then point out what's actually up there, people get upset because we're not respecting the artist's wonderful hard work for humanity. Not many reviewers have a real gift for effrontery. I think that may be my best talent. It's a talent that could be viewed as a detriment to one's professional success. Oh, sure, but if you can't make fun of bad movies on serious subjects, what's the point? Your review of Shoah was one of your most controversial, and you had to fight William Shawn to get him to run it. Do you have any regrets about that particular battle? No, I was being honest about what I knew and what I felt. I suppose that I can understand editors facing the fallout of running something like that, and preferring to leave it alone. Sure, but on the other hand, editors who show courage in some directions maybe could be pushed to show it in other directions. I mean, a Holocaust movie should not be sacrosanct simply because of the subject. I think most of the reviewers were willing to call the director of Shoah a great filmmaker because he'd taken on a great subject. They used to treat Stanley Kramer as a great filmmaker too, especially when he made the nuclear disaster movie On the Beach. Did you know when what you said was going to cause a ruckus? In this case, yes, but not always. People take offense at things you would never have guessed at. A friend of mine told me that he took a date to see a movie that had delighted him, and afterwards she walked so far from him on the sidewalk she might have crossed the street. I sometimes felt as if New Yorker readers kept crossing the street. People almost deliberately want to misunderstand what a critic is saying. If a movie touches a nerve, they accuse you of the wildest sorts of things. The whole social dimension of movie-going is something that doesn't exist in television. I can remember so many kinds of strange emotional aftermaths of movie-going, whether I was on a date or with a bunch of friends. If you disagree about too many movies, it's very hard to sustain a friendship. There aren't many other art forms, or public forms of entertainment, where that's really the case. No, if you go to a dance concert or an opera, you are relatively safe. But if you go to a movie, you never know what's going to be dug up. I know people who can't talk about movies they've seen to friends on the telephone when their spouse is in the room, because they disagree and it has become a sore spot. But of course there's the other side, too, the friendships based on shared movie tastes. I'm curious about some of your early movie-going experiences, about what films affected you strongly in the way that films can when you're very young. I saw so much. It was movies in general that drew me. When Garcia Marquez says that he wouldn't have written novels if he'd been able to make movies, it's clear what he's saying, because there are so many elements that go into movies that he could have used. It's a supreme art form, and for a while Coppola and Altman and Godard and Bertolucci and a dozen others ran with it. That's why, when I think it's used badly, I'm so derisive. I want so much from it, because the possibilities are there. On dates, my enthusiasm would often be condescended to by the fellow. He would think it was his mission to straighten me out. And, you know, if you hold forth about why something is great with a guy who just wants you to calm down, it's a flattening experience. You learn to shut up, or you find another guy, or you don't. I wanted to ask you about one feature of your writing that bothered some people, the use of we and you. It was never an imperial we, it was we in the audience, or we as a group. I always used it right alongside I to make the distinction between my reactions and what the collective audience might be reacting to. I used you in an indefinite way to represent you people or one or I, and relied on the context to make the meaning clear. I used it in the way we use it in conversation, where you say, you know that such and such? About once a year I used one. I avoid cinema the way I avoid one, because where I grew up, only pretentious phonies said they were going to the cinema or referred to themselves as one. I'm fascinated by the idea of what kind of person it takes to become a movie director. Let's be brutal. It takes a person who can raise the money to make a movie. And also what kind of a career a director can have. I mean, there are such odd inconsistencies and ups and downs in a director's career. I think you're being a bit dreamy. Educated people often now speculate about directors' lives the way less educated people used to fantasize about the stars, and they read Premiere the way stenographers used to read photoplay. I take your point, and I'll throw one back. What about the issue of relationships with filmmakers, whether it's just a critical relationship or actually a kind of deeper affinity that crosses over into friendship? Do you mean, is it okay to hang out with the people you write about? Let's say it's dicey. I think the deeper affinity is deeper than friendship. There are directors I personally don't feel any warm response to, whose work I care for intensely. That's one of the surprises in the arts. You think that you would like somebody personally if you like his work, and that may not be the case at all. Anyway, I've rarely had personal relations with directors, even the ones I've written about a great deal. I knew Jean Renoir very well. I knew him perhaps better than I've known any other director. One night in the 50s, I was at home in Berkeley working on displays for the theaters I managed, and there was a knock at the door, and Jean Renoir was there. We fell into each other's arms, and I guess you could say we never fell out. Somebody had sent him some things I'd written about him. He had gone looking for me at the theaters and was directed to my house. We remained in close touch until his death, yet his later movies, from the period in which I knew him, I didn't care for very much. He knew that, and it was a source of pain to both of us. I knew Peckinpah fairly well. It's a funny combination, Renoir and Peckinpah. But most of the directors whom I've been said to be on close terms with, I hardly know at all. I've only seen Brian De Palma to say how do you do to 3 times. I've heard people criticize you for having what they view as a kind of unseemly loyalty to a filmmaker, or engaging in special pleading for him. And yet, sometimes the same people seem infuriated by what they see as a kind of perverse fickleness. I suspect that behind all this is the notion that a woman can't be a true critic, that she has pets, and also that she is vindictive. It's simply natural in the arts to have preferences. You wouldn't be a critic if you didn't have emotional involvements with the work of certain artists of the past and the present. Am I right in thinking that you're disappointed in Scorsese? He has become a much more proficient craftsman, but the first films he did that I responded to intensely, Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, had a sense of discovery. He was looking into himself and the world. I was disappointed in Goodfellas, and I thought Cape Fear was just a terrible mistake. The Age of Innocence is really Merchant Ivory's terrain. Even though Scorsese shows what he can do with it in some ways, he doesn't shape the material. I thought the movie disintegrated. When you think of Scorsese working with Daniel Day-Lewis, you want more. Day-Lewis is the kind of actor that De Niro was as a young man. You don't want just to see him anguished. What about De Niro? It's a long time since he's shown the fervor of his work in Godfather II, or the intensity of Taxi Driver, and his restless bopper in New York, New York. I enjoyed him in his brief performance as Al Capone in The Untouchables. I liked him in Brazil, but in the big performances, something sluggish and stolid has crept into his acting. When he attempted comedy with Sean Penn in We're No Angels, it was Penn who made me laugh. I find De Niro heavy-spirited. What do you think of Michelle Pfeiffer? It may be because she has such a great camera face that she hasn't gotten her full due as an actress. She seems the most American of the women stars, but she has a surprising range. You see her opposite Sean Connery in The Russia House, and you accept her as Russian without fuss or doubts. I accepted her as Catwoman. She was lovably nasty. You clearly have favorite directors also. Yes, of course, and I have blank spots too, such as Fassbinder. Uza, too. But if you mean, do I play favorites, I don't think so. It's apparent to anybody who reads me that I think Altman has some real achievements to his credit, even though I've been disappointed in many of his films. I used to say that he made a good one and then a bad one and so on. He made both in shortcuts. It has some of his worst work and some of his best. Can you give me an example of each? Well, sure. The little boy trudging home after he's been hit by a car is almost unbearably fine. The camera fastened on Jack Lemmon's back as he walks down the hospital corridor pushes its point. It's awful. Lemmon tries so hard he has a special mood-altering quality. He seems to be pleading with you, and you think, what is he pleading with us for, in movie after movie? What does he want from us? Of course, in short cuts, you have Tom Watts and Lily Tomlin, and Bruce Davison, and Madeline Stowe, and others who are in character. What other directors do you feel a bond with? There's a deviltry in Paul Mazursky's films that makes me laugh. I often read stories that make me think Paul Mazursky should make a movie of this. Like Laura Segal's Her First American. Oh, and when I read Saul Bellows' A Silver Dish in The New Yorker, I thought Mazursky could make a classic short film for TV out of it. Let me put it this way. We all know that people in the audience have their own special tastes in directors and performers. Well, so do critics. Maybe they think differently from the guy who just wants to see sullen, pouty, slutty women. Maybe they don't. The difference between the layman and the critic is not that the critic is objective, but that he probably has more background in the art, and if the gods smile on him, he can write. And perhaps the critic's work has sharpened his tastes. For example, there's an intelligence in Judy Davis's acting in Husbands and Wives that I find exciting. It's a more controlled and sophisticated form of what Bette Davis had for some of us in the 30s and 40s. You felt there was a drive there to express herself via acting. Some people found it repellent. But on the other hand, I respond to what I think the large audience responds to in Julia Roberts. There is something about her in Pretty Woman that's enormously touching. That broad smile gets to just about everybody. But Julia Roberts not smiling is like Tom Cruise meditating. You know, that whole group of women stars of the 30s and 40s didn't make any impression on me as a kid. Maybe they would have if you'd been born earlier and been a girl. Bette Davis's nervous sass got to me. It was as if she were saying, I'm more alert than women are supposed to be, and I'm not afraid to be a cartoon. Did Katharine Hepburn do that too? She made an impression of a very different kind. She was like no one I'd ever imagined. She made a style out of affectation, and then, at her best, transcended it. I'm thinking of movies such as Little Women and Alice Adams, and her great performance in Long Day's Journey into Night. How is it different with actors now? It's a period of sensational acting, even though actors don't often get a chance at shaped characters. When they do, as in the small roles that Holly Hunter and Gary Busey had in The Firm, they pop up like jack-in-the-boxes. Kelly Lynch pops up even in turgid melodramas, and Susie Amos really takes the camera. Tim Roth seems to be able to give shape to each role he plays, and Susan Sarandon becomes more richly sensual. TV is a good medium for actors. I'm thinking of Albert Finney in The Given Man on A&E. Two-parters and three-parters give them a chance to develop a character. But performances on TV don't vibrate in memory the way big-screen ones do, because there's usually even less of an imaginative structure supporting them. And there isn't the interval of thinking them over while going home. But some stay with me. James Woods as Roy Cohn on HBO, Brian Dennehy in a whole bunch of roles. Kelly McGillis surprised me in Jeff Bleckner's In the Best of Families, and Andre Braugher on Homicide is about as good as acting gets. Anybody who cares about acting might take a look at Mercedes Ruehl's performance in Martha Coleridge's version of Lost in Yonkers, or Robert Duvall in Days of Thunder, or look at Jeff Bridges as the ex-con in American Heart. Every little physical detail is right. The picture maybe has too much integrity and not enough dramatic imagination. You get a whiff of virtue. But Bridges is the real thing. What about the kinds of roles that actresses are getting today? Taller, stronger-looking actresses play revamped cliché heroines, but with titles such as Doctor or Captain. They can throw a punch like a man. They're toy boys. As moviegoers, we get to watch these wonderful Amazons. Sigourney Weaver, Daryl Hannah, Gina Davis, Uma Thurman, Laura Dern, and all the others. But only a few, Angelica Houston, Christine Lottie, Jolie, and Natasha Richardson, have on occasion landed real women's roles. Still, the situation isn't much better for men. Is sexual politics getting into movies? A lot of it is. Conspicuously, in the rabble-rouser Thelma and Louise, a revenge movie for women that distorts the issues it poses, much as the Charles Bronson Death Wish movies used to. Along the way, the heroines destroyed a working-class man, the man with the rig, because he had the wrong style. He had low-down sexist attitudes, and the women were outraged by them. If he'd been upper class, he wouldn't have talked like that. It's a classic unconscious movie. And then the doomsday finish. The women punish men by killing themselves. They're heading for an all-girl heaven. Did you see The Fugitive? Yes, Tommy Lee Jones ran off with the picture. He would have run off with JFK, too, if it hadn't been such a load. Are you still as committed to Brian De Palma? Yes, of course I am. His Carlito's Way has a tired script, and Pacino, as good as he is here, has played his role before. But Sean Penn gives one of his sneakily witty performances, and De Palma himself knows how to set up certain kinds of scenes better than practically anybody else ever has. He does sequences that are similar to ones he's done before, but he does them with more ingenuity, more finesse. It may be a while before he does anything again that's as phenomenal as Casualties of War, but he is one of the few directors who keep developing his technique. It's one of the frustrations of writing movie criticism that so many of the people who will take the trouble to read reviews have leather-bound tastes. They'll wait in line for the Merchant Ivory Remains of the Day, but they won't go near a gangster picture, even if, in visual terms and in sheer movie-making skills, it's far more complex. I understand why. Literate people like the literate sound, the commas in place. It all stands for decorousness, for safety. I think they mistake their priggishness for high standards. To be fair, Remains is very well acted. I particularly liked Peter Vaughan, who played Hopkins' father, and Ivory has become accomplished at what he does. Even his unvarying pace achieves a dull splendor. But the picture is almost a parody of repression, the culmination of nothing. See, I put my leanings right out there for you. A few years ago, you wrote, "The only fresh element in American movies of the 80s may be what Steve Martin, Bill Murray, Bette Midler, Richard Pryor, Robin Williams, and other comedians have brought to them." Yes, I think that's right. When you saw Richard Pryor alone on stage in a concert film, you felt the flipped-out truth of what he was saying. The performers, especially the stand-up comics crossing over, brought a roughhousing charge to 80s movies. They were as marginal as we felt ourselves to be. See, there's a we that represents the hip audience. Whatever they weren't square. That's changing. When you see Steve Martin starring in a dull family movie like Father of the Bride or Parenthood or House Sitter, or Bette Midler in Beaches or For the Boys, you may feel a thud in the chest, and that was a depressingly bad production of Gypsy that Midler was in on TV. At one point, I couldn't stand listening to the musical cues anymore and got up and put a rap CD on. Which one? Salt and Pepper. Why are you so rough on harmless family comedies? I know that sometimes I treat mediocrity as if it were criminal. I don't think I can explain that except with the totality of what I've written. I love low comedy, and I love high comedy, and I like mixtures of the two, as in soap dish. But when I see entertainers play down to the public, turn wholesome, I want to cry foul. What do you think about the esteem in which Clint Eastwood is now held? As a director, it's a delicious joke, further proof that there's no such thing as objective judgment in the arts. I did think Eastwood's performance in the Line of Fire was one of the best he's ever given, perhaps the best. But when he was fun in his early movies, it wasn't because of his acting skill, and now that he has a little skill, he's lost the spaghetti sexiness that made him fun. He's all sinews. He has become a favorite of intellectuals just when he's losing his mass audience. It has to be a consolation prize. I don't think anyone before you had talked about movies the way you did. I'm thinking of things like that line in your goings-on note for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. No one else can balance the ups and downs of wistful sentiment and corny humor the way Capra can, but if anyone else should learn to, kill him. I literally, physically can't respond to that stuff the way some people do. Loving movies is a very peculiar love-hate relationship. I mean, you love what they can be, but you also love the crap they are. I have my limits, though. You also love jazz, and I've always associated the unsentimental, fast, cool appreciation of virtuosity in your writing with jazz. It wasn't conscious, but I think that, by temperament, I wanted to approximate something of the speed and feeling of jazz. Did you ever think about becoming a jazz critic? I might have gone in that direction, but I didn't. I love gospel, too, and I'm sort of tickled that I admitted to you that I like rap. Why tickled? Because people find it out of season in someone who will be 75 in a few months. They think that I couldn't possibly enjoy the music, that I'm just trying to be a swinger. People are still outraged when I say I like rock. I also like Handel and Purcell and Gluck. But God, what I don't like is Broadway show tunes. I love movie musicals, but there's something about the stale Broadway approach. The musicals I love tend to be things like Singing in the Rain, Cabaret, and the MGM Pennies from Heaven. I loved Little Shop of Horrors and Phantom of the Paradise and Saturday Night Fever, and other movies that used a little bit of a shiv in them. I'm not crazy about the soft American musicals. The musical seems to me a genre of movies that is perhaps at a dead end. But it shouldn't be. We've had the singers, we've had the music. Elvis Presley was trashed early on. Most of the rock and soul people weren't used at all. There was about 5 minutes of Aretha Franklin in the Blues Brothers. When Tina Turner did her number in Tommy and the camera traveled up her legs, it was like an explosion. But movie producers didn't seem to notice. I was amazed when I heard that New Yorker messengers taking proofs to Mr. Shawn on a Saturday would go up to his apartment and be invited in, and he would be watching Soul Train. Isn't that great? He loved all of show business. When I turned in my review of Richard Pryor's concert movie, he was overjoyed, because he had worshipped Pryor and had followed his career from the beginning. I mean, he had many sides that didn't come out, really, in the way he ran the magazine. He played terrific jazz piano. But he also had a series of taboos that were part of his creed of good writing. Did you have Confederates at the New Yorker? People who encouraged you and said, "I'm glad you're here"? Or was it kind of an uphill struggle? When I started to appear in the magazine, some of the writers, the one whose prose seemed to be rolled like an English lawn, wrote me hideous letters, "Get out of here with your cowboy boots." Oh my God. Some of them were from people I had admired, and that was really a shock. What color were your cowboy boots? I didn't have cowboy boots. I've never had cowboy boots. It was their idea of my writing, trampling manure on the pages of the New Yorker. Well, there is a certain kind of literary sensibility that seems to be profoundly aggrieved by your style. They were, some of them, the kind of people who said they didn't have a TV except in the kitchen for the maid. That was the sort of approach to movies. E.B. White represented the essence of New Yorker style, and I couldn't evoke the movies in that spare, lucid E.B. White language. Why did you take a break in 1979 and go out to Hollywood? I thought that I was maybe written out, that I needed a change. But you didn't like it in L.A.? I missed writing. Pictures were opening, and nobody was saying the things I wanted to say. It was like a firehouse horse hearing the bell. There were stories in the press suggesting that you were a failure out there. When I left the New Yorker, I had a commitment to give some seminars and lectures at a couple of universities in the South, so I hadn't yet reported for work at the studio when one of the news weeklies ran an item saying that in my first weeks in Hollywood, I'd managed to alienate everyone. That was picked up and elaborated all over the world. It was what people liked to read. The movie people in L.A. treated me incredibly well. I think they were terrified that I was really an Eastern spy, that I was going to write an exposé of some sort. By 1991, were you afraid you weren't strong enough to find fresh ways of talking about things? It had become too hard for me to go into New York to see the movies, and my balance was so bad that a few times I fell smack on my face on the sidewalk. But it wasn't just me. Movies by then weren't setting off the kind of sparks in me that they had in the 70s. I didn't think they spoke to what was going on in the country, in the way The Godfather did, or Nashville. Wonderful movies turn up, but movie criticism now is often a report on a vacuum. I always walk out of a theater nowadays with a deep sense of regret that I'm not going to read what you thought. Which films of the past couple of years do you regret not writing about? Hearts of Darkness, the documentary that included footage Eleanor Coppola took during the shooting of Apocalypse Now. It dealt with Coppola's manic-depressive swings. It was like the naked, honest-to-God version of Fellini's 8.5. You heard Coppola saying that he didn't know what he was doing, that he was failing, and then heard him convince himself that he'd brought it off. I was sorry not to have been able to write about The Fisher King, because I had often found flaws in Terry Gilliam's work, in the way he overscaled his pictures, and this time he scaled it right, and Robin Williams, Jeff Bridges, Mercedes Ruehl, and Amanda Plummer did great teamwork. That hairy leprechaun Robin Williams talks so fast that what he says hits you like a double take. He and Amanda Plummer are like a boy and girl Marx Brothers. I'd like to have written about Carl Franklin's small film One False Move. And there have been little unimportant pictures that were very satisfying, like Rambling Rose and Diggstown. Soderbergh's King of the Hill is a wee thing but nicely detailed. Lately, well, 2 movies I loved. Fred Schapisi and John Guare's 6 Degrees of Separation, a drawing room comedy that rises to such heights it becomes a genre of its own. It's amazing that it ever got made. The ending is a disappointment. You don't want Nora, but you don't want Mary Tyler Moore either. And Jim Sheridan's In the Name of the Father, an Irish movie without any malarkey. It's sane, that's a high compliment, and forceful. And what a situation. A son who doesn't get along with his father is imprisoned with him, and the father monitors everything he does. The movie has substance. What about Schindler's List? I'm not sure there's much more to be said about it. Do I think it's a masterpiece? No. The basic material is great. The movie itself is a very fine melodrama, made with the skills of a superb movie maker and with deep love. It doesn't have the moral complexities of In the Name of the Father, but within its limitations, it's just about the best of its kind. Schindler's List is Spielberg's attempt to be a grown-up artist. I hope he won't lose his most inspired side, his access to the child's emotions we all have in us, what came out so strongly in Jaws and E.T. Are you still gluttonous about movies? Perhaps a little less so than I used to be, but I'm gluttonous about all the arts. When I went dancing, I never wanted to stop. If I start a novel in the evening, I will stay up half the night to finish it, even though I know I'll feel hungover the next day. What have you been reading? Except for my greater tolerance for pulp on the screen, my taste in books is very similar to my taste in movies. I've been reading a lot of Edna O'Brien and Lee Smith. I just finished her Fair and Tender Ladies. In its own way, it's almost as good as her novel about country music, The Devil's Dream. I've just read Anatole Broyard's Kafka Was the Rage. It's a memoir of life in Greenwich Village in the 40s, the memoir of a sensualist and amoralist. Sentence by sentence, it's as beautifully precise as any contemporary American work I know. I laughed out loud at Philip Roth's Operation Shylock. It's the most daring and, of course, obsessive of his novels. I haven't been startled into laughter like that since Naked Lunch came out. What about nonfiction books about social issues or politics? I tend to read those things more quickly. I slow down for something like Frederick Crews' The Critics Bear It Away. Crews' gamesmanship is insidious, it's so entertaining. What a good time he has taking scholars apart. But I tend to whip through most nonfiction books. They're often written to be informative, and I read them to be informed. I really love reading writers who care about how the words go together. Do you read any fiction about movies? I liked Michael Tonkin's book, The Player. It has an anger that's quite different from the movie's lightness of tone. Tolkien got at the conflict between the executives and the writers in a mean, funny way. About The Player, what happened when the novel was made into a movie? The book is about how writers are mistreated, and Robert Altman is notoriously not interested in writers or fidelity to writers. He turned it into an amused satire of Hollywood. The fact that the writer, the wrong writer, got it in the neck seemed a minor matter. The movie itself is minor, enjoyably so. Are there any young writers you particularly admired in the past few years? I liked My Apprentice and Lyndon, two of the stories by David Foster Wallace in his collection Girl with Curious Hair. My Appearance, the one about the actress scheduled to be a guest on David Letterman, is very distinctive. What was it about? The woman's husband was worried about what would happen to her, whether Letterman would cut her to ribbons, and it's a legitimate fear. On talk shows, you never know what you're up against. Have you had bad experiences? Generally, it's been a disaster for me. I've been put in false positions, asked vacuous questions, most likely by an edgy, hostile host, and accused of liking only highbrow European films or violent American pictures. I guess I don't need to ask if you'll be doing TV interviews for the new book. Onward. People have criticized you for being an amoral sensualist. Just what I loved Boyard for. And people say that you have an obsession with violence and sex, and that you have a dirty mind. The better to write about movies. As for violence, I have a wonderful quotation from Tolstoy. Was that the one that you had pinned up in your office at the New Yorker? Yes, now I have it at home. The paper has yellowed. He said this on 1908, on the eve of his 80th birthday. I am seriously thinking of writing a play for the screen. I have a subject for it. It is a terrible and bloody theme. I am not afraid of bloody themes. Take Homer or the Bible, for instance. How many bloodthirsty passages there are in them, murders, wars, and yet these are the sacred books, and they ennoble and uplift people. It is not the subject itself that is so terrible. It is the propagation of bloodshed, and the justification for it, that is really terrible. As I see it, there are the movie makers who use violence for a turn-on. They put you on the side of the bullies. For example, the rape scene in A Clockwork Orange, the emotionless killing in the Dirty Harry films, such as Magnum Force, the gory opening of Wild at Heart. Then there are the movie makers who sensitize you to what violence does to its victims. Classic examples, Grand Illusion, Casualties of War. I think it's the job of a reviewer to make the moral indifference clear and to try to make it clear that some movies, such as The Wild Bunch, blur the distinction. There are also movies that use violence for casual bang-bang effects. Most action films do. They're childish, pre-moral, and a lot of people enjoy that freedom from judgment. What I'm getting at is that violence has a whole range of meanings. Simply to condemn it is mindless. People in the government also jump on the incessant quality of it. You know, the fact that violence is a convention, and that you just absorb so much of it. I don't know what to say about that. I don't have the answers. People ask me about asking you to handicap the Oscars. Phooey. It holds no interest for you. It goes against the grain of what I think criticism should be. I mean, trying to dope out what the big winners will be. What about how an Oscar might affect or help an actor's or actress's career? Well, this is why I've stayed off television. You once wrote, it says something about the nature of movies that people don't say they like them, they say they love them. It's safe to say, isn't it, that you still love them? Yes. Then, if you feel you can't write, why shouldn't you do monthly interviews? Because it's not the same. This is just off the top of the head. It's not like giving yourself to a subject. Do you feel that you're in a painful predicament now? Getting old isn't fun, despite Betty Friedan's thesis. She must have a fantastic constitution. To assert that it's a wonderful new stage of life? Balls. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry I didn't get this out in time for her 106th birthday on June 19th, 2025. But here it is a few days late.